Before we get to the episode, exciting news. I have a new podcast, a second podcast. I am the host and producer of the Strandcast, the official podcast for Strand Bookstore in New York City at 12th and Broadway, the coolest independent bookstore. And now there's a podcast every other week featuring long-form conversations with authors from different genres. The Strandcast is available on iTunes and Stitcher. Just search for The Strandcast. Links will be in the show notes, of course, and make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. And now for the show. Hello there. Welcome to a brand new episode of Talk Music Talk with Boice. I am Boice. This is my podcast you are listening to. Thank you for tuning in. For that first-time listener, Talk Music Talk is a weekly music interview podcast where I have long-form conversations with people connected to music from different genres and different backgrounds, both established and emerging, singers, songwriters, music therapists, music journalists. And on this new episode, I had the pleasure of speaking to Benny Benack III, jazz vocalist, trumpet player, a fellow Pittsburgher. He is based in Harlem, and I first found out about his music when he followed me on Instagram. He has a wonderful sophomore album coming out January 2020. It is called A Lot of Livin to Do. In the conversation, a great conversation, we talk about his coming from a musical family, his decision to focus on singing and playing the trumpet. We talk about his influences, becoming a band leader. Also, we get into his developing his musical style, knowing when not to compromise yourself, and how he got Isaac Mizrahi to write the liner notes for A Lot of Livin to Do. After this conversation, you will hear my favorite song from the album. It is called Later On, which we talk about during the interview. So here it is, without further ado, my conversation with Benny Benack III. Enjoy. You know, it's crazy. Yesterday, before I listened to your album, I don't know why, but I happened to watch the Mr. Rogers documentary.
Oh,
Started watching it. Won't You Be My Neighbor?
Yeah, of course.
Would you have a cover on your album? Have you seen the documentary?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Just instant tears. When
okay.
I watch that, it's just, if you need a good cry, that's what I say when I do that tune on shows. I say to people, if anyone is in need of a good cry, or don't watch this on an airplane, everyone's going to think that somebody in your family died or something, because it's heart-wrenching, I mean, but he was such an angel.
Yeah. I'm like 20 minutes in, so I haven't gotten to the crying part.
Yeah.
Your connection to the movie, Mr. Rogers, because we're both from Pittsburgh.
Right. Well, my family has always been very connected with that show for a number of reasons. First of which is the name Benny Benack around Pittsburgh is my grandfather was a New Orleans style traditional jazz trumpeter, and his real claim to fame was the 1960 Pittsburgh Pirates, the little plucky underdog team that beat the Yankees in the World Series. Their theme song for that whole year was composed by my grandfather and Handyman Negri from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, Joe Negri, who's still alive now, I think 92, 93 years old, world-class jazz guitarist. And they collaborated on this song that was basically Camptown Races, but they changed the words to be about the Pirates.
Yeah.
And that was like a huge hit. That was a huge theme song. That was a single. He put out a 45 of that. So my grandfather and Joe Negri were connected career-wise. And then also there was an episode of the show when Fred Rogers goes to a music store, to get a trumpet lesson. And my grandfather was on an episode of the show and, played on the show. And to my knowledge, the only other trumpeter that appeared on the show many years later was a young Wynton Marsalis. Okay. And he performed the song It's You I Like, which is the other ballad from the album that's Mr. Rogers. So, I've always had a close connection to that show, and being a Pittsburgher, we got to represent. It was nice to find a way to put a couple of those on the album.
So what was you watched Mr. Rogers as a kid?
Yeah. I mean, and I think when I was very little, I still would have been watching the actual show. I still caught the tail end of his career, and I think as I go around the world and perform some of this music now, and I ask people that are fans, it's cool because there's like a whole new generation of young people that are still growing up with Mr. Rogers. Now they're just watching it in syndication. And, I was just back in Pittsburgh this past weekend. I got back yesterday on the megabus, the glamorous life of a musician.
Love the megabus.
That's right.
Free Wi-Fi.
Right? It never works. Yeah. But, I just was back in Pittsburgh, and, they have this movie coming out Thanksgiving weekend with Tom Hanks.
Okay,
Tom Hanks is playing Mr. Rogers, and all the local musicians in Pittsburgh, they hired them to be the band from the show. So they recorded everything in the original WDUQ studios where Mr. Rogers did it. And, of course, the guys that are in the film that, were hanging out with Tom Hanks said he's exactly what you would think. He was the greatest guy, super nice. I can't think of anyone else that would be a better fit, to play Mr. Rogers.
Like a good fit. Yeah. So why did you choose the song, Won't You Be My Neighbor?
Something I often do is I get an earworm. I get a song stuck in my head, and then, it's almost a game that I play with myself. I say, how can I reimagine this song? What feel, musical, style, rhythm, feel would go well with this song? And that was an example where Won't You Be My Neighbor, was stuck in my head, and I said, this might sound nice as a Brazilian double time samba.
Yeah.
And, so I did that. I have other arrangements. On my first recording, I did an arrangement of I Only Have Eyes for You, which is like a doo-wop song. And we kind of rearranged it as a pocket funk groove. I have an arrangement that I haven't put out yet that is, of Tom Jones, It's Not Unusual, combined with another Pittsburgher, Ahmad Jamal's Poinciana groove. Yeah. So, that I also am working on an Afro-Cuban arrangement of Backstreet's Back because, I'm a millennial and I grew up with the Backstreet Boys. So, I that's something that, is like a little science experiment in my brain. Sometimes when I get these songs stuck in my head, I just kind of start, bouncing around the idea, well, how can I, rearrange this song and still have the original song intact? You don't want to totally, depart from what the original tune is. But with the Mr. Rogers theme, I think it just kind of really lends itself to this kind of easy breezy samba, and, we had, the Fender Rhodes on that track. Some of the tracks on the album have a Fender Rhodes, and that gives it a nice warm touch. And I like, the idea of when I was organizing the tracks for the album to kind of put that at the beginning because it's kind of this nice, welcoming, warm, for the next, 70 minutes, you're going to be my neighbor here.
Put on your cardigan.
There it is. So, that kind of is a lot of my music in general too. I don't think I've had enough, internal struggle and, life hasn't kicked me down enough yet to really be fully in the Chet Baker depths of despair. So, I like, songs like that with a really happy, positive, welcome to the neighborhood, energy. So
was that ever a concern that if you're doing jazz music that it has to be kind of like has this depth to it and heaviness, and you've had to have lived?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always been, a romanticism with jazz musicians in, kind of almost looking up to that prototypical jazz musician lifestyle where, you need to have your heart stomped on, or you need to be a junkie, or you need to be in the gutter somewhere in order to really, live inside the space of, a heart-wrenching ballad. And, to a certain extent, I do think, having those kind of life experiences and emotional experiences matter. I would say the best love songs that I've ever written, in fact, the ballad that's on the album is an original of mine later on that,
Dude, that's brilliant.
Oh, thank you.
Love that
thank
song.
you. And that came from, a breakup.
Okay.
the first love of my life, my college girlfriend. We broke up, and I sat in a practice room at the Manhattan School of Music and bawled my eyes out and wrote a great song. So I do think there is an element of that. But, I also have this conversation with my friends a lot. These days that are also, burgeoning jazz musicians. In 2019, it's a very different world. And, I don't think necessarily we all have to be, doing heroin to be able to have the depth of Charlie Parker or something like that. I think it's
or opiate jazz,
right? I think it's more just about the emotional maturity, and certainly for me, I have a much easier time kind of accessing the joyful, boisterous energy. So generally, when I'm putting together a set of music on a performance, I really have to be cognizant of here's where the emotional point is going to be. Here's where maybe, you don't have to be, center stage, jazz hands, tap dancing. We can kind of let things go to a little bit of a deeper place. And, I usually don't reside in that deep place for too long, or it gets uncomfortable and I got to go back to my song and dance. But I think, every great performance and every great performer, really has that balance, that yin and yang, the happy, the sad, the good and bad, the masculine, the feminine, everything that, you want that perfect balance in every performance. So I try to get there, but I definitely live in the happy zone a little bit more. So
is that the music you were always attracted to?
I think so, or I would say musicians with the energy, like a Louis Armstrong, like a Dizzy Gillespie. I was attracted to certainly virtuosity, but what I really appreciate about people like Louis and Dizzy was they weren't afraid to be themselves. They weren't afraid to have fun and bring other people into their experience. And I think too often in jazz music, there seems to be this expectation with genius or with virtuosity where you almost are expected to be, Thelonious Monk if you're a genius. Like if you're not aloof, if you're not staring off into the distance, if you're not dressing funny or something like that people won't take your musicianship seriously as a genius, whereas someone like Dizzy Gillespie who, completely rewrote, how jazz is played, and certainly the trumpet is played. Undeniably one of the masters of that instrument and in the language. And he was like, laughing his ass off the whole way. He was having a ball. He didn't take himself too seriously, but when he put the trumpet up to his lips, that was obviously very serious business. And so, that's something that I've kind of struggled with, kind of wanting to be, a little bit of the class clown and want to have that aspect of my personality come through in my music and my shows. And, along the way, people have, kind of telling me, oh, well, no one's going to take you seriously if you're joking around and smiling, and, you need to stand in place and scowl and be Miles Davis if you're a trumpet player. And, I tried that for a while, but ultimately it just wasn't me being true to myself. And so, I kind of said, well, screw it. I mean, I'm going to follow, the lead of those guys that I look up to. And, I believe in, kind of this, the energy and spirit of the music I want to present. And I'm just going to do it that way. And if other people, are turned off by it, then, change the channel,
When did you come to that realization that to take the courage to, I'm just going to be me?
I think that's something that we all, every artist or every young person goes through. You get out of college, you're in your 20s, you're trying to figure out what the hell am I going to do with the rest of my life. And, for a lot of us artists and musicians, generally that hard part is over. We're not somebody that, was an English major in college and has to figure out what they want to wake up and do every day. We know we want to do music, right? But then beyond that, the question becomes what kind of music or what kind of artist do we want to be? And that happened to a lot of my friends. We were all these really, precocious, talented young people all running around New York, hanging out at these clubs till 4 a.m. and just playing songs and learning and fellowshipping. But you haven't quite figured out what your angle is going to be or what your identity is. And, it was a process. It was something that kind of happened gradually over time. And, we have a history in jazz music of kind of apprenticing and working with other people as a sideman. And I was very much informed by working with other band leaders and taking the things from them that I thought were cool and, you know, also stowing away the things that I didn't want to do when it was my time. And, you know, I think I was fortunate to have some, you know, mentor figures, older musicians that gave me some opportunities, showed me the ropes, took me out on the road, and I was able to kind of, you know, filter what I wanted to do, so that after I had been around the world a couple times and had, you know, met some folks as a sideman in other people's bands, and I started getting opportunities to record and perform as a band leader, you know, by that time I had kind of, you know, focused things a little bit. Yeah. So, you know, it was a very natural process.
Where's that point where you, as an artist, and I think any artist, where you shake off your influences and find your style and to be who you are?
Man, that's a really deep question. It's something that all, you know, jazz musicians especially, every great jazz musician has that moment where they are so, you know, ensconced in one of their influences, and that's all they've been listening to for a month straight, and that's all they've been transcribing. And then you go up on stage to play and you realize, like, oh my God, like I'm just literally, you know, ripping this guy off. I'm just a copy. And I've had that conversation where, you know, piano players have said, okay, I cannot listen to Brad Mehldau anymore. I'm done. If I listen to more Brad Mehldau, I'm just going to end up, you know, a watered down version of Brad Mehldau. I don't want that. And, you know, I think that's a necessary, you know, a necessary evolution. And I actually encourage, you know, young students and people that ask me for advice. I say, you know, go on a deep dive, listen to nothing but, you know, Kenny Dorham for a month and just, you know, completely envelop yourself in his sound and his vibe and his language, and go ahead and sit in on a jam session and try your darndest to sound exactly like Kenny Dorham, because you're going to get a lot out of that. And, you know, you do that to a point, and then, you know, you do kind of have to say, all right, this chapter, let's move it on to the next one. And, you know, that's something that I never have run from, because I think the tradition of jazz has always been about, you know, orally taking cues from those that came before you. And you can look at every great, you know, every great innovator, and even someone like Louis Armstrong or Dizzy Gillespie or Woody Shaw, who, you know, on the, speaking about the trumpet, who totally reshaped the language. There are still very clear people that came before them where you can say, all right, well, Louis Armstrong wanted to sound like King Oliver, and, you know, Clifford Brown wanted to sound like Fats Navarro, and Woody Shaw wanted to sound like Freddie Hubbard, and so on and so forth. So, you know, to me, I have instances where people hear me play, and on a given night, someone might say, oh, you sound, man, you just copped all that Freddie Hubbard shit. Or they say, oh, man, you know, you're playing those gospel licks, you know, really checking out your Sean Jones, your Roy Hargrove lately, or I heard those Kenny Dorham scoops. And, you know, when someone says that to me, I'm like, oh, great. Thanks for listening. Like, you caught it. I ripped that off from him. I stole that from him. And, you know, I think, at least the journey for me to discovering my own voice, my own sound, was very much, you know, steal from these 5, 10, 15, 20 people you love. And I believe when you jumble all that up and, you know, you spit it out, it comes out in the wash as something individual and something unique. So I was never one of those people that said, that actively, while I was still in the process of finding my own voice, was like afraid to copy someone or afraid to sound like someone else. I welcomed that. I said, well, I'm just going to, you know, follow my, you know, musical sense wherever it leads me, and trust that at the end of it, it's all going to come out. You know, all that mix of all of your influences will end up sounding unique. So, you know, on any given night, I could sound like a rip-off, you know, a cheap Walmart version of any one of my heroes. But, you know, at the end of the day, whatever style of music I'm playing, there's, you know, it's still going to be individual. It's still going to be unique. So I was never afraid of that, you know.
Good. And when did it start for you? Because obviously you come from a musical family. When did you start playing? When did you think about it being a career?
Well, yeah, I always say to people I was very fortunate to be surrounded by, jazz music from such a young age. Not only being in a musical household, but literally a father that was a jazz musician, a grandfather that was a jazz musician, a mother that was a singer, and, my parents met in a band that they were, performing in together. And my mom being a music theater voice teacher, me falling in love with the Great American Songbook, right? All of the great Broadway composers were really jazz composers. So I was just around it. And honestly, if I'm really going back, I can never think of a time in my life where I was aware of my surroundings and jazz wasn't a part of it. So, whether that was singing before I even played an instrument. I started on piano when I was 5. It was like pulling teeth to get me to practice the piano. And when they put my grandfather's cornet in my hands when I was 8 or 9 years old, that it was much easier to make me practice the trumpet. It wasn't so much of a chore. So started on piano and also, found my way to the trumpet still early, it was 2nd grade or something like that. I don't even think band programs in school started until 4th grade. And we had to convince the band director to let me, go play with the 4th graders or something like that. And so of course that helps. I got a very early start and, my summer job as a teenager growing up, instead of having to, mow lawns or, work as lifeguard or the driving range or something, I just played gigs with my dad, so I was very fortunate that I was able to get that experience and exposure when I was so young, so that, by the time I was 16, 17, 18 years old, ready to move to New York, I already had an experience as a working musician. I knew what it was like to play a wedding gig. I knew what it was like to play in a restaurant and take requests and, the kind of skills that are more, akin to being a working musician, and not an artist necessarily. And I think both are really valid. And if you want to afford your own 1-bedroom in Harlem, like we're speaking in today, I think, having a bit of both in there is probably pretty good,
Doesn't hurt. Did your parents or family, did they give you advice of what the life of a jazz artist would be? Yeah, certainly. They were very supportive, which is something that, again, I don't take for granted. I went to Manhattan School of Music and I knew kids that were on full scholarship that were brilliant, whose parents had stopped talking to them, who I went to school with a friend that was a brilliant pianist and his father didn't come to any of his recitals. He wouldn't speak to him. And only when he graduated and went back to school at Columbia, for business, did his father say, "Oh, my son has returned to the family." It's like that was some dark shit. I couldn't believe that. But, that's a lot of people's experience. Their parents are not, thrilled when they say, "I want to make a go of it as a freelance musician." And so my parents were very supportive of that, thankfully. And my father, had a unique perspective because his father, my grandfather, Benny Sr., the trumpeter, was a full-time musician, and he was a band director, at Clareton High School at the University of Pittsburgh. He directed the marching band shows for them, and so that was what he was doing during the day. He would come home, around the time the kids would get home from school, take a nap, and then get ready to go out 6, 7, 8 o'clock and be out until 4 a.m. playing gigs. And that was his life. So, he raised my father, my aunt and uncle. He raised 3 kids and built a house and had a family just on his music, just in Pittsburgh. Yeah. And I think that was, a lot of work. That was hard for him. And he kind of imposed on his kids, my father, my uncle, my aunt, music should be a part of your lives, but it's hard if you want to do that full time and have a family. So my father, who was a very talented musician in his own right, took that advice and went to business school and
is the vice president of marketing at a bank for 35 years. And, he's good. He's got his 401k. He's got that taken care of, but he still plays gigs 2, 3, 4 times a week around Pittsburgh. So, that worked for him. And his brother, my Uncle Flip, is a great drummer, great musician, and has a sound production company. So if he's not playing a gig with my dad, he's providing the, speaker equipment for a concert. And music is still very much a part of what he does. And for them, that ended up being the most fulfilling path. But, for me, I kind of decided that I wanted to, make a go of it full bore. And my parents were very supportive of that. They did, my mother especially did want me to go to school, want me to get my master's degree, so there is an element of, if I get tired of, touring the world and not sleeping 340 days out of the year, I have a master's degree. I can go, be the trumpet professor at, Missouri State, Grand Valley, Sister of the Mount, University and, get health insurance or something. So, I was very grateful for that. I went to school, I got it out of the way, and, maybe I've got a little plan B with the degrees stowed away if need be, but I was lucky. They were always very supportive.
Yeah. Before you even got to school, when did you decide that it wouldn't just be trumpet, be vocals? Did you see them both on the same plane?
I mean, for the longest time, I wanted to consider myself a trumpet player. But I was kind of lying to myself. Like, I remember, being like 9, 10, 11 years old and being on these gigs with my dad, and I'd be back there in the horn section with the other guys, and we'd be playing our horn parts and our backgrounds, and my dad would say, now we're going to bring up my son Benny III to sing Love. And I'd like look at the other guys and be like, oh man, this is some jive shit. Like, I gotta go up there and sing, man. Come on, I'm a real cat. I'm not, that's not me, man. I'm a horn player. And then of course, like, begrudgingly, I would go to the front of the stage and then just like ham it up, just love the spotlight and love that moment. So, I think I was kind of lying to myself for a while, and I was just, man, I'm just I'm a trumpeter in the background. That's me, man. I'm none of that front man shit. And, somewhere along the line, I think, probably, once I started to get into college and have some performances under my own name, even in little restaurants and little things like that, the ratio of singing to playing just kind of sorted itself out. And, people ask me all the time, are you a singer that plays trumpet, or are you a trumpet player who sings? And
I'm not going to ask.
Well, I mean, if I really think about it, I definitely view the trumpet as my craft. That's the skill that I went to school to hone. That's the thing that I, sit in front of that TV and practice for 4 or 5 hours every day. Yeah. And I never had that kind of, training or, emphasis on the singing. To me, the singing was always something that was fun and that people enjoyed and that I enjoyed doing. But, as I've gotten older and, started recording music, and I've realized that there is always something universal about a vocalist and about a lyric that people are going to be able to latch on to. Yeah. You could play the most accessible, palatable instrumental music in the world, and there is still a large swath of people that are going to feel like they're at the dentist's office, right? Yeah. So if nothing else, I realized that, singing in a show is a way to connect on another level with people. And so it was a point of emphasis for me. And now, as I've gotten older and I get a lot of opportunities where it's almost as if I got the gig because I'm a singer, and, the trumpet is a nice little bonus, but if I didn't pick it up all night, they wouldn't care. They want me to sing. So it's had to become more of a serious, endeavor in the way that the trumpet is. And I'm still, getting used to that because, I'm so, disciplined and regimented about warming up and warming down on the trumpet, and everything there is so worked out.
Yeah.
And, I look around at all my singer friends that's their instrument, and they're not drinking, and they're on vocal rest, and they have their tea and their lemon and their steamers and their emergency. And I'm just over, screaming, laughing at the other end of the bar with a whiskey in my hand. I'm just like, I'm fine. I could sing anything. My voice is indestructible. Whatever. Fuck it, And I'm realizing now, I'm getting ready to do this like month and a half tour with Postmodern Jukebox, and it's a crazy schedule. It's like, a different city in Europe every day for a month and a half, with a trip to India on the off days, so it's really, really rigorous. And they also have me singing, like Whitney Houston songs, which, Postmodern Jukebox, if you don't know, is this enterprise where they take, popular music and rework it, kind of is like 1920s, 30s swing style jazz. So, I'm going to be singing Whitney Houston in Umbrella every night. I really have to take care of my voice in a way that maybe I haven't thought about before. So, I would definitely say I always thought of and think of myself as a trumpet player, but, as my career has dictated, the singing has become obviously an equal part of who I am. So, that evolves too. It's still an ongoing evolution, but I just got to remember not to shout so much during the day. I get excited. So,
where'd you get your chops for the singing? Because you listen to your album, you've got the phrasing there and the emotional content behind it. Where do you learn that? Well,
as I said, my mother is a very accomplished singer, so certainly I give her the credit, for any intrinsic, things about the singing. But for me, the things that people remark to me the most about my singing, like you said, phrasing and intonation on scatting, or taking liberties with melodies and things like that. I definitely think that comes from my unique perspective as a horn player, and of course my spirit animal and my guiding light in life, the man that I'm staring at on the wall right behind you, is Frank Sinatra. And everybody always says, Frank Sinatra was not, quote unquote, a jazz singer in the way that, some of his contemporaries were, but his phrasing is immaculate, right? Yes. And where he decides to breathe and which lines he is going to lean into and back off from, those kind of things. And that was just osmosis, because again, with me singing, I was never dissecting and analyzing these performances the way I did on the trumpet, but I would just listen to something a million times in a row and it rubs off, So I would say, if it was a singer, it was coming out of the, the crooner tradition. Sinatra, Harry Connick Jr. was, because he was so big when I was little, and he was putting out his CDs, and Tony Bennett, and, that whole lineage. But I would say the things that maybe set me apart as a singer are the fact that I'm a horn player and I was listening to so many instrumentalists play, and my brain, it doesn't just switch when I'm going from horn player to singer, and it's like, now I'm in singer mode, let me access this in my memory banks, and now let's switch back to trumpet, flip the switch. I mean, it's all kind of jumbled up together. So I think that's it's just like I said, it's unique. It's not really a good thing or a bad thing, but I kind of came into my own as a singer kind of in a very different way than most people that are just primarily singers. So I like I said, it's unique. It's different, but I do think, it took me a little bit longer to get comfortable with that side of my art and things like that. But I think I got there. It just came in a very roundabout way.
Do you have to feel a lyric to sing it properly?
Yeah. I mean, I think ideally you're not, looking up the words to the song on your phone while the piano player plays an intro, but sometimes we do what we need to do. And
you're a professional.
I could see my mom yelling at me, from some stage somewhere, like texting me on my phone while I'm on stage. trumpet. You should know the lyrics. You should not be looking up the lyrics on your phone. And she's only texting me because she knows I'm on my phone, on the music stand, searching Body and Soul lyrics, Ella Fitzgerald, into Google while the piano player plays his intro. So, I'm not the best example. There's people that are like, man, when I learn tunes, I have to know the lyrics. Like, I can't play East of the Sun if I don't know the lyric, man. And like, of course. Yes, it makes sense. You're not going to play My Funny Valentine in a fun, happy, jovial way if you know the lyric is like, a sad thing. So, of course, yes, it's great to know the lyric. Yes, it's great to, access the emotional content as best you can. And I do try to do that. I mean, I think, again, coming from my mother, who is an actress, coming from the stage, this idea of being a storyteller. And if you're singing a love song, ideally you're embodying the lyric, you're embodying the character of that song. So, of course, your mannerisms, your presentation on stage, if you're singing a song about losing someone, is going to be very different than if you're singing Our Love Is Here to Stay. And to an extent, I try to access that. But, I almost feel sometimes like I struggle with, especially when you're like a band leader, there's just so many things, flying around in your head the entire time. And, you're thinking about, it's like you're playing chess and you're 4 moves ahead. So I'm singing the ballad now, trying to embody, the very thought of you. But I'm also thinking about what the next song is going to be to contrast the tempo of the ballad. And I'm also thinking about when I'm going to like mention my CDs to people. And I'm also thinking about, what drink I'm going to have on the set break. And then I'm thinking about what time we have to check out of the hotel tomorrow. And, all of these things. So, it can be difficult for me personally sometimes to really be in the moment. I think we all strive for that as performers and artists, to let everything else kind of fade away and really just be singularly focused on the lyric, the emotional content, and convey that to an audience. And that's something that I struggle with all the time. It's almost like I said, it's easier to kind of come in and sing A Lot of Livin to do, or kind of sing Come Fly With Me and kind of just embody this fun, carefree spirit that is almost, for me, is like autopilot. Like I can kind of access that while I'm thinking about a million other things. But when it comes to the point of the night when you really want to have that emotional, a little bit more vulnerable, exposed moment, that's where I really kind of have to like take a deep breath and kind of focus everything in. So, and that's still something that I that it's very much in process.
So for the song on the album about the ex,
right,
what's it called again?
Later On.
What did it take to get to that? Do you just have to recall the relationship to get that performance in the studio? Well,
it goes back to what we were talking about before with the life experiences shaping the music. I mean, it was not ideal, but the way that relationship went down, as is the case for a lot of young people in close quarters, which we lived a floor apart from each other in the dormitory at Manhattan School of Music, which was not a big campus. It's not even a campus. It's a building. That's it. And, you break up in the fall of the school year and then, you walk into the cafeteria the next day and you see them there, and then you see them there 6 times over the course of the day.
You never not see them.
Right. So, and of course, everybody, all your friends are completely, you have the same friend group, and it's just such a small world, which we could have a whole other separate interview about the perils of dating in a very small social circle like the music world. But, as is often the case, we were on again, off again for that last semester, and it was like clockwork. We would get back together for a month, break up again, and I would go down to the practice room in tears and write a great love song, and then we'd be together for a few weeks and maybe I wouldn't have any inspiration. We'd break up again and I would have another great song, So I don't know. I mean, I definitely think that there's something to be said, for that composing process being aided by, experiences and there is certainly something to be said for setting aside some time to be available and sitting down at a piano and just forcing yourself to compose for something to come out. And that's totally viable. And I've written a lot of great songs that way, where I just said, all right, well, I got an hour, I'm free, let's just play some chords and see where my hands go, and let's write something out. And that's on piano. I do most of my composing and arranging on the piano. But it's harder to just conjure up, to make up, that kind of emotional content and put it into a song. Again, I find it much easier to, embody the spirit of kind of more of a "Our Love Is Here to Stay"-esque jazz song. I can do that and, kind of mimic that feeling for the sake of writing a lyric and writing a song. But it's much harder to have a deep song about loss or about heartbreak and, kind of just fake it, so to speak, at least for me.
Yeah. And you went to Manhattan for both degrees?
Okay. Just right straight through, 6 years, knocked it out. I knew if I had just a taste of the real world, if I tried to wait, I would never have gone back for that master's. So I'm glad I just banged it out when I did.
What was your experience like there?
It was.
What did you learn?
I learned, $300,000 worth of musical information.
Priceless. Man.
Yeah,
Priceless.
Exactly. I think my experience was very similar to a lot of my friends that are all, very talented artists that just could not wait to get out there and start their career and, get the race going, so to speak. And, I think that experience is similar whether you're at Manhattan School or Juilliard or the New School, or you're not in New York City, whether you're at the University of Miami or the University of Michigan State, or you're in Pittsburgh in Duquesne University, anywhere. If you're an artist and you're serious about your craft, there's no rubric or blueprint that says, well, when you're 21 years old, you are ready, and that is when it's time. No, in a lot of cases, people are already proficient and ready and raring to go when they're 18, when they're 19. So, I always noted this experience with my mother, who I mentioned is a teacher. She teaches drama department music theater at Carnegie Mellon, which is like, the factory for Broadway and TV, and film. So she has students all the time where you're going to Carnegie Mellon, the best conservatory in the world, to be a music theater actor or actress. And then, you go on a callback for Hamilton and you get the role. Yeah. And then are you going to go back the next semester and stay in Pittsburgh and, go to class? No, you're going to go take the gig.
That's why you're kind of there.
That's why you're there. Yeah. And, this is something that has confounded me for years, is that these conservatories go to such great lengths to stifle those career opportunities for these young artists. And I dealt with it, and I know friends that dealt with it, and I know super famous, high-profile musicians that when they were in college, they dealt with it. And, it's just it's a tough thing, because I understand where the conservatories and the universities are coming from, because in my case, Justin DiCioccio, who was the head of the program at Manhattan School for many years, it recently, they kind of have had a changing of the guard. Stephon Harris, the great vibraphonist, he is running the program now. But with JD, he would stump for these young musicians and in many cases get them scholarships, in some cases, in my case, a full scholarship. Yeah. And his expectation is, I went to bat for you. You're getting this $60,000 school year for free, and you better damn well be here for the big band concert that I'm, expecting you to be here for. So, I see both sides of the coin. And there were certainly, for me, towards the end of my undergrad, junior, senior year, and then in the master's, there were moments where, I had to make some tough phone calls to my mentors and family and friends and say, hey, I got this gig, such and such has called me, it pays this, I'm going to go to this country, it's kind of a big deal, I want to do it. But school, I have to miss an ear training final and, miss these 2 rehearsals, and someone's going to be really pissed off at me if I do it. What should I do? And, it's a case-by-case basis. Sometimes I would take the gig and take the heat, and sometimes I would have to say no, And in the moment, that's always really tough, because you're 19, 20 years old and somebody you really look up to calls you for a gig and this is the biggest call that you've ever gotten in your life to that point, and you're terrified if you say no, well, some other trumpet guy is going to do it, and then he'll become best friends with him and he'll do all the gigs and I will have squandered this huge opportunity. But, now, being 28, almost 29 years old, being removed from it a few years, looking back, I was like, oh, that was so silly. It was like 1 month. It was one little gig. I was so concerned about it. If I could go back and just, pat myself on the head at 19 years old and just say, dude, just finish school. Like these people, the calls are going to be there. The people are going to be there. So, that's something that I think all of my friends, regardless of where we studied, we all had the same experience of, okay, school's cool. We have a great private teacher. You're learning a lot there. You certainly have the freedom to practice. If you're in a conservatory, they give you that freedom, expecting you to be in a practice room for hours and hours every day. And of course, you grow and you meet other young people in the same path as you. And, I'm still, my best friends are all people I went to college with. But there was also a large portion of that experience that I was totally asleep in the desk in the back of the room because I was out until 4 a.m. the night before. And, there were certain things where if there was somebody that, still had their, test answers from 5 years ago that would be passed down every year and there'd be a jazz history final. I already got my degrees, so you can't take them away from me. If I just tell you all that Jay Ratman has great notes on the jazz history final, and it was passed down from year to year to everyone. And that's how we all studied for our jazz history final.
The statute of limitations.
Right. No, you can go back. I did not mean to invoke Jay Ratman's name. He's a whistleblower. He did not want his identity out. There's going to be a whole House investigation, by the Senate if I bring out his name. So we're going to have to delete that. But, of course you learn some things, but at a certain point, you might be ready to be out there before you've got your piece of paper. And that's something everybody has to reconcile with. And, I think a lot of times it leaves a bad taste in people's mouths because that's what they take away from the experience is that, the man was trying to keep me down and I got called for this gig and school wouldn't let me go and they're jive and they don't get it. But, like I said, I see both sides of the coin. The school has their expectations for you too. And, it's just a balance. And I would say I got a lot out of my school experience because I had a great private teacher. I learned a lot about my instrument there. That was priceless. Yeah. I met some of the best musical connections and friends that I have that I'm still best friends with today. That matters. And, sure, there were some assignments that I took seriously and I learned along the way, but, I'd be lying if I said I was, completely, invested in every assignment and everything, because especially if you're in school in New York City, it's kind of hard to, sit in the library and, study your Bach counterpoint when you know that Roy Hargrove is playing at the Jazz Gallery that night, and that's where you want to be. So, it's a balance, and in that way, I think really actually prepared me for my professional career because as a freelance, it's constantly juggling your calendar, this gig with this gig. Well, okay, I'm booked here, but I really want to do this. But is this the time to double cross this guy and bail on him? Is this opportunity worth it? Okay, well, I want to do it. Can I squeeze this in? And, that kind of time management and opportunity management that you dealt with in school was totally just, professional development because every day, I'm looking at my calendar trying to see, which person I'm going to upset by bailing on, or, which commitment I'm going to honor, because again, I hear my mother's voice in my head and she says, you have to honor your commitments, and all that kind of balance was, that was like career training before I even realized it. Yeah.
So when did you decide that you wanted to be a band leader and record the first solo album?
I think that was always the plan. I always envisioned myself like, Miles Davis or, Harry Connick Jr. I've always wanted to be on the front of the stage with the spotlight, but I think I had the good sense to realize that, when I was kind of ready for that. And the other thing is, once you kind of step out into that space, once you kind of announce yourself as I am a band leader, I am an artist, I am a soloist, just human nature, other people will see that and say, well, I need a fourth trumpet for my big band gig on Wednesday, but Benny, he's has his own band. He's probably on tour somewhere. He's probably doing something. Like, he's not going to, invest his energy in my project because he's invested in himself. So I think I had the good sense not to do that before I was ready because, there is an element of, kind of working musician gigs and sideman gigs that are going to fall by the wayside when you focus more on yourself because, you have to look at every band leader is looking at their sidemen as, commodities that, are willing to put their energy and investment into their, dream, their belief. So, if you're a band leader, the best trumpet player might be Benny Benack for your gig. But is Benny Benack, who has a million things swirling around in his head and is going on tour with Postmodern Jukebox and doing his own thing, is he really going to be able to give my dream the attention and energy that I want my trumpet player to have? Whereas I could call trumpet player X, who might be, a couple years greener than Benny Benack, but still great, but he doesn't have that much going on. So I know he's going to come to every rehearsal for free. He's going to go all in on my project. He'll, learn all the music. And so I didn't want to reach that point until I was ready, A, and B, trying to pay rent in New York City. I didn't want to, kneecap myself too early and lose out on playing with other people and just, playing restaurants and weddings and private events just to pay rent. I'm lucky that now after, this month here in September, that's 10 years since I moved to New York. And, in April, I finally moved into an apartment by myself and I didn't have to share a bathroom with 3 other dudes. And
congratulations.
Thank you. And, only now am I in a position where, if I'm in New York City for a week or two, I'm not running out to some restaurant for $100 every night. I'm like, you know what? I would so much rather sit on this couch and watch Amazon Prime right now. And that's what I need because I need to rest. I need to recharge. And I also don't need that $100 that drastically to make or break my rent this month, which, again, it's a natural evolution because at no other point in my 10 years of New York City existence was I in a position to turn down $100 gigs. I was, a gig slut, I would just do anything for any money. It didn't matter. I'll take the train. I'll bring gear, whatever you want. Just give it to me. I need a gig. And that's something that I've had to kind of learn to pace myself a little bit more now because, I'm no spring chicken anymore and it's the energy is not boundless. It has limits and I'm learning, not to extend myself so much these days.
Is there a fear when you making that transition from sideman and gigs like that for other people to being a band leader?
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a fear and that's, conversations I've had with other peers of mine that are at similar crossroads in their career where they've been around the world, they've played with their heroes and, they have something more to say musically than serving other people's music. They want to compose, they want to arrange, they want to present music in their, vision, their likeness. And if you're used to the schedule of a working musician, of a sideman musician, and you're used to having 6 gigs a week because you're playing this place with this cat, this place with this cat, when you all of a sudden start, really going all in on yourself and some of these other calls start to fall by the wayside, you can wake up one day and look at your iCalendar and say, well, wait a second. Like I had way more gigs when I was 22. What am I doing? I'm going backwards, and you do kind of have to deal with that and reconcile that. But I think ideally you understand that, it's always peaks and valleys, ebbs and flows. And if, you know, in the short term, the work is going to be less, the aspiration long term is that, you know, the things that you are manifesting for yourself will ultimately be greater than, the hustle type lifestyle. And maybe ideally you might only have 1 gig a week, but that 1 gig a week is going to pay the same as those 6 other gigs that you were doing running around, just kind of, jobbing, as my friend, the British friend, Mark Lewandowski likes to say, jobbing, mate, jobbing. Just kind of playing those rent gigs,
And that this is under your own name and represents your own vision.
Sure.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Antonio Sanchez was talking about that.
Okay. Well, I mean, he's a great example of someone that, was a sideman, apprenticed with many great musicians. And when it came time for him, he had more to say. He took that and ran with it. We would all be nice if we all had, Oscars, and Grammys with our music. But
because he said at some point, like even touring, you'd play at one place as a sideman, and then like you're trying to tour with your project,
right?
And it becomes almost impossible to do it, time wise. You have to give up the side gig to really expand and grow as an artist for your own stuff. Yeah, totally. That's what I'm dealing with right now. Yeah. So the first album came out 2017. You got the new album coming out.
Yes, sir.
January 2020. A Lot of Lovin'.
A Lot of Livin'.
A Lot of Livin'.
A Lot of Livin'. Well, there is a lot of lovin'.
That'll be the sequel.
Yeah, there you go.
I don't want credit for it. I don't need credit for it either. So A Lot of Livin'. Tell me about this album. How long you been working on it? How'd you choose the songs?
Well, this album is my sophomore release, and it was recorded in January of this year, right after New Year's, and kind of along the schedule, similarly to my first album, which was also to the day recorded on the same day. I recorded them January 4th, 2 years apart. And by the time you go through the process of the record date, mixing, mastering, editing, engineering, talking to the artwork designer, coming up with the cover art, coming up with the liner notes, all of these things. Then talk to the manufacturer, figure out how many CDs you want. Do you want a hard case? Do you want a jewel case? Do you want to do vinyl? Figure out all of that. Then you hire the PR people, you hire your radio person, you're mailing out your CDs, blah, blah, blah. And all of that process, basically it's like having a baby. Like it's about 9 months, give or take. And in fact, I had the copies of my CD delivered to my apartment about 2 or 3 weeks ago, which from January, that's about, pretty more or less 9 months. So I had my second baby here. And then, you work backwards from there. So the best time for me with my schedule to release it was January. That's when I have a gig at, at Dizzy's Lincoln Center. And that's looking at next year as kind of the project of next year will be touring and promoting the album that this year's project was creating, basically. So, I worked very closely with Ulysses Owens Jr., who's the drummer on the first album, also drummer on this album, but he was also the producer on this album. And, we actually had a very, a crossroads moment for me. I'll try and Reader's Digest version of this as much as I can. Ulysses initially had got me in touch with a very prominent producer from LA that had won a number of Grammys working with other similar current jazz artists, and someone that really had quite the reputation. And Ulysses was able to facilitate this person listening to my music, being willing to coming on board, so on and so forth. And we were thinking about what direction we wanted this to do. And I knew that I wanted it to be a continuation of me as a singer, me as a trumpeter, me arranging standards, but also bringing some of my own music, some of my own lyrics, into fruition. And we had got this gentleman on board, and I had never met him before. We just exchanged a couple emails. We talked on the phone maybe once. And he had pitched this idea of reimagining Chet Baker Sings. We're going to take every song of Chet Baker Sings, and we're going to do that top to bottom. We'll even recreate, the cover art, everything. Because, you're a trumpet player, you're a singer, you're a white guy with nice hair. So that's what we'll do. That'll be perfect. No, I'm sure that was not what he was thinking. But the sticking point was, he said, for the level of, audience that you're trying to access, people are they're moving past swing. They don't want to hear swing. And I think we got to do all these arrangements. Everything is going to have to be like, even straight eighths, groove, funk, pocket, not going to have any, spang lang on this album. It's just the audience that you're trying to reach. They don't want to hear that. They're over it. And that's what it's going to be. So this is my pitch to you. Okay. This is my vision. And, you're going to pay me $1,000 to do this. And I'm coming over from, the West Coast, and you put me up in the hotel, and here we go. And at that point, I had already, the first chip that I had secured was to have Christian McBride play bass. That was a lifelong goal of mine. I actually saw the other day, somebody put this little newspaper article when I was a senior in high school, and they asked me, what are your career aspirations? One of which was like, play and record with Christian McBride. And, 10 years later, I'm manifesting that, and I thought to myself, man, I have Christian McBride, the most swinging bass player on the planet, maybe ever, on board, and I'm going to pay him all this money to play this album, and we're not going to swing at all. It's going to be like
get straight in
stuff. Like what, and I had such it was such an internal struggle for me, because here was this producer that clearly he has his finger on the pulse of the music scene. And I have no doubt that had I, followed through with that vision, that there would be, certain things, success wise, visibility wise, accessibility wise, that could be garnered from that. But, we had kind of had like a verbal agreement, and we were kind of getting things set. And, I had a couple sleepless nights where just something wasn't sitting with me right. And I just said, you know what? I'm going to put so much of my own money into this. It has to be in my vision, to a point. Or even if I get, say this album takes off, now I'm touring the world playing this music that like is not really in my soul, because at my core, I just want to swing, and
you need to be making it swing live.
I know. You're right. I blew it. Fuck.
But you wouldn't be. I feel like you wouldn't be able to listen to that album and feel the pride.
It was just something. It was. What it was that moment. I called Ulysses in the middle of the night. I think I sent him this big, this like love letter email at 5 a.m. And I said, listen, Ulysses, I have to trust my gut on this. And I know that you stuck your neck out to get me in touch with this guy, but something's not sitting with me. I have to do it a different way. And I know I'm putting a huge wrench in everything, but like, I have to stand up for myself in this instance. And I was so, just gut-wrenchingly anxious and nervous to hit the send button on that email. And I did it. And Ulysses, wrote me back the next day, and he was like, man, this is the best thing that could have happened. I'm so proud of you. This is what needed to happen, because you have, identified in yourself what you stand up for and what you believe in as an artist. And this process was meant to, it was almost like he was saying like, yes, I was testing you all along, grasshopper, and you have passed the great test, but it was deep, because I realized that there are certain inalienable things about my music that I can't compromise on, that I can't sacrifice on. And, that was something that prior to that watershed moment, it wasn't as defined to me. So, and of course it all worked out. This person totally understood, and, there was no hard feelings. And then, because I had kind of been through that with Ulysses, and also he was someone that was the first musician when I was talking about those phone calls that I was getting to pull me out of school, it was to go on the road with him. And he was someone that believed in me and, understood me as an artist and as a person, and also happens to be a great producer with other people. So then I said, look, Ulysses, I know you were just looking out for my best interest, but, would you be interested in producing this project and working with it on me? And he was like, of course, I'd love to. So, he set out to help shape an album that would be a little bit more focused and a little bit more polished. You know, my first album was a little bit like, here's this guy. He sings. He plays trumpet. He writes music. Here's a, you know, pocket groove arrangement of a doo-wop song. Here's a very contemporary, you know, post-bop instrumental song where the harmony is very obtuse and he's really playing a lot of trumpet. Now here's, you know, a, you know, kind of schlocky pop song. And it was just all kind of thrown together. And that, for my first thing, that was cool because it was kind of like, here's everything I can do. You know, here's, you know, how many songs? 12 songs. There's 12 different musical stylings by Benny Benack, you know? And not that I'm not proud of that music and I don't think it was a great record date. I think it was. It sounds great. But I understand that as a, you know, commodity, as a package, you have to sort of rein it in a little bit so people have something that they can kind of, you know, identify you by or kind of grasp onto. So, you know, Ulysses was very instrumental in kind of helping me. You know, we probably went through 2 or 3 or 4 rounds of choosing songs and arrangements and his suggestions and my suggestions and, you know, coming up with a, you know, set of music or, you know, 12 songs, basically 2 sets of music that there was a common thread between all of them. And whether it was a vocal tune or an instrumental tune or the Rhodes or the piano, that regardless of the style, you know, that there was still some continuity there. And I think, you know, we really accomplished that. And my hope is that, you know, for all of the critics and people that, you know, my very expensive PR team will be sending them to, that, you know, they recognize that there's a little bit more kind of focus that went into, you know, who I am as an artist. And, you know, I have to give Ulysses a lot of credit for helping me, you know, find that out in myself.
So how many originals are on the album?
Oh man, it put me on the spot. I'm not exactly sure. You know, I have 12 tunes and a bonus track that's just digital that is, you know, at the end of the session, we had some extra time and me and McBride just did a little duo track together. But roughly, I want to say that the mix is probably almost 50-50. It's something like that, you know. Not that was conscious, you know, but I'm happy that it kind of worked out that way because, like I said, I have a great respect for the tradition of jazz and the Great American Songbook, and, you know, Cole Porter and you know, Rodgers and Hart is always going to be a part of my identity. But I also, you know, think I have something to say as a composer and lyricist and arranger. So I'm not exactly sure of the split, but in general, I think that if you go to see one of my shows, it's kind of going to be that, you know. I'm not going to throw a set of completely original music at people, but I'm also not going to play, you know, kind of blue from top to finish. You know, there's like going to be a mix, you know.
That sounds good. It's a great album, as I'm telling you.
Oh, thank you.
Sure. And just kind of wrapping up, where in your style? I feel like that's a part, your visual style. Yeah. The way you dress, you look at your Instagram, all that stuff. Is that a natural thing that just you're already doing and put into the music?
You know, I think like anything else, you know.
Well, describe the style.
Oh, you make me describe the style. Well. If I'm describing, I would say dapper. I would say, you know, clean, classy, you know, classic look, you know, all of these things. Very expensive looking things, whether or not they actually are. But, you know, I think that's something that you know, you craft along with every other aspect of your, you know, musical identity. And, you know, I almost don't want to, you know, I hate to invoke the B word and talk about my brand without sounding just completely self-absorbed. But
I'll say it, your brand.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I do think, you know, putting on my different hat when I'm not, you know, in a practice room, you know, composing and just full out an artist, I do, you know, also, there's an aspect of me that looks at my career as a business and a brand and what I want to present to people. And I'm kind of running this one-man band, so to speak. And, you know, again, along the lines of, you know, you want there to be some continuity of people, something that people can latch onto and recognize you and identify you by. And, you know, that's something that kind of came over a long amount of time. You know, I remember there's one of my best friends came to New York the same time as me, great drummer, vocalist, arranger, composer extraordinaire, Brian Carter. And Brian, I remember he kind of took me aside in those early years. We would always go to Dizzy's Club, you know, Jazz Lincoln Center, and we would go sit in with the jam sessions that were led at the time by Michael Munso.
Yeah.
And, you know,
upcoming guest.
That's right. That's right. And, you know, I was right along. Munso would go tell me to learn some Wayne Shorter tune for the session that night, and I'd do it, and we'd be all ready. But, you know, Brian kind of took me aside at one point, and he was like, man, you know, we need to go shopping. You know, you need some help. You need some help. You know, these jeans, these are Pittsburgh, you know, rural jeans. We need to adjust the fit, you know? And I remember going out with Brian and going to like H&M or something, and he was like, here, put this sweater on. It's a small. And I said, small? Brian, I am not a small. I'm a large. And he said, no, you're a small. We need to, you know, redefine your definition of what fits, you know? And I always credit Brian for that. Brian, if you're listening, I always credit you for, you know, like teaching me, you know, what kind of pants really fit, you know. And he got me started, and, you know, my tailor was a Brian Carter recommendation, and, you know, the guy who made me some great suits, that's James at Vitone, in case you know, maybe I can get a little discount later for the plug, James. But, you know, I think also once you define you know, the artists that you want to emulate a little bit, you know, you look at all those things. And for me, that's Frank Sinatra, like I said, Tony Bennett, Eric Garner Jr., and those guys are pretty much in suits and bow ties and tuxedos, right? But then also, on the trumpet side, you know, those heroes of mine are all the, you know, great hard bop, bebop guys that had a suit and tie on every night. And if they were, you know, playing a jazz festival outside and it was 100 degrees out, Art Blakey and his band were in suits and ties. Now, they may have sweat through the entire outfit by the end of the show, but, you know, they looked clean. And I get in this argument with a lot of people my age, a lot of jazz musicians. You go on Facebook now and type in anybody's name and find 400 comments of people arguing if you should wear tennis shoes or a t-shirt to a gig or not. And I believe, you know, everybody, whatever their vision of themselves as an artist, what their brand is, that's them. And for some people, wearing, you know, a big t-shirt and a pair of torn jeans and sneakers, like that also is a part of the music that you know, that's who their personality is. That's what they want to convey. So I don't necessarily think that, you know, anyone should be in the business of telling other people, you know, how they need to present themselves with their music. But for me, I want the association of my music to match the style. So if we're talking about my music as, you know, elegant, classy, you know, slick, kind of old school music, that, you know, when you think of those adjectives and you think of style, it's probably going to mirror that. So, you know, that's something where at least in my band, you know, I want the guys to look sharp, and I want everybody to be wearing like a fitting suit and, you know, just look really sharp and slick. And, you know, excuse me, if I am really, you know, diving into it, quite frankly, I do think that audiences, you know, subconsciously or consciously will take, you know, the music more seriously when it looks like the musicians are taking it seriously. And in so many of these clubs, so many of these places, the audience is not, you know, a trained jazz audience going to see Miles in the 50s where everyone's going to be hushed. You know, every room is not the Village Vanguard. And most of the time, my band nowadays is going into places where the atmosphere is people talking, people having drinks, people having food. They're talking, they're shouting over the music. And I think one of the most powerful ways to wrangle that in is to have, you know, a seriousness about the way you look, because as Art Blakey said, they see you before they hear you, you know. And I remember I was just playing at the Black Cat, a great club in San Francisco with my band a couple weeks ago. And you know, we were having conversations there with the owner, the great friend of that club, who, you know, was a guy who worked on Wall Street and is good friends with John Varvatos and, you know, knows Isaac Mizrahi, a friend of mine. And that guy probably has, you know, the finest clothes in his closet of anyone I've ever seen. But, you know, he actively encourages people on the band. You know, he would see me in my suits every night and say, hey man, you have some, like, you know, some Jordans or something, throw on with that. Or, you know, to my drummer, oh, we got to get you like a, you know, like a nightgown t-shirt, one of those oversized t-shirts, you know, just kind of, you know, encouraging people to kind of experiment like that. And, you know, I think all of that is good and well too, but there is also, when we're walking up on stage and you see these people in the front row and they're like, oh gosh, one guy literally said, he was like, well, these aren't just any jazz musicians. They aren't any old jazz musicians. It's like, oh gosh, you know. And just for me personally, I think if people are paying a $35 cover charge, you know, your outfit should mirror that. Now, on the other side of the coin, Michael Muenzo, a dear friend of mine, I have enjoyed watching his evolution from those early days at Jazz Lincoln Center, where he had a 3-piece Savile Row suit on every night, to over 10 years later, you know, whatever the Sheiks are going to wear that night. You know, it could be suits, it could be, you know, dashikis, it could be smocks, it could be anything. And, you know, I've enjoyed watching, you know, his band and his music, you know, the music kind of mirroring and matching the brand of the style. And, you know, if you're me and you're trying to sound like Cole Porter and Frank Sinatra, maybe everyone's going to be in a suit. But if you're this kind of like, you know, interactive James Brown, you know, Parliament, you know, jazz, also, you know, accessing, you know, all these different styles of music, the style is going to reflect that too. So as long as, you know, what you're wearing, the visual matches, you know, the oral experience and what people are hearing, you just want there to be, you know, something, you know, you want there to be continuity between that. So as much of that's as much thought I put into it. I want my music to be classy. I want to look classy. You know, let's go with that. Dude. Thank you.
Yeah, and wrapping up, because you just reminded me, Isaac Mizrahi, designer, did the liner notes for the album.
Yes.
Friendship, how'd that come about?
Well, and that's usually the first, you know, adjective, or I should say noun, that comes out with Isaac, is designer. And that was where, you know, for those that don't know, he rose to prominence in the 90s with the, you know, the peak of the runway, high fashion era. And, you know, a very accomplished designer that, you know, has made dresses. He came to fame from Unzipped, which was a documentary.
Great documentary.
Great documentary. He stole the show in that. You know, kind of the behind the scenes of that classic, you know, fashion era of the 90s, runway era, if you will. And, you know, he was known most as a designer and personality, and, you know, people know him now because Project Runway or, you know, QVC, he's all over Target, these things. But people don't know that on top of all that, he is a great performer, and he's a singer, and he was in, you know, he went to LaGuardia, he was in the Fame movie, you know, as a singer at that time, and he's a big jazz fan, and I got looped in with his band he's been playing with for, you know, 15 years. And he does cabaret, and, you know, it's just hilarious. And he, you know, has these shows where he'll tell a story about making a dress for, you know, Hillary Clinton or Michelle Obama or Liza Minnelli, you know, and tell a hilarious story, and then, you know, bust out into a Blossom Dearie song, you know, and then he'll tell another story about, you know, some experience he had hanging out with, you know, Oprah or something like that, and then he'll do a Blondie song, you know. So he is kind of a man after my own heart, in that he has these different experiences and different musical loves that he kind of mashes up together into a show. And you know, we play the Carlisle every year. We'll be there for 3 weeks, end of January, beginning of February, and it's, you know, he packs the place every night. It's just a riot. It's like stand-up comedy with a live band that just, you know, plays some great swinging tunes. So it's so much fun. And you know, kind of becoming friends with him, you know, becoming buddy on the road with him a little bit. And also, he just put out a memoir, and he's a fabulous writer. So it was something where he had never actually kind of done liner notes or known that the foreword at the beginning of an album is actually called liner notes, and he kind of said, well, what do you want me to say? And I said, just be yourself, listen to the album, and if anything sticks out, feel free to mention that. If you want to talk about how great I am, you could also do that. I don't want to influence you, right? But it came out great, and I'm so thrilled that he was really cool about lending some words to that. So yeah, buy the CD. I know nobody has CD players anymore, but you're only going to get the Isaac Mizrahi liner notes if you buy the CD.
You're not going to get
folks.
that streaming.
That's right.
Yeah. So this was great, Benny. Best place for people to keep up with you online, get the album, pre-order.
Well, yeah, you said Instagram. I am on my phone for better or for worse.
Instagram
all
king.
freaking
Good. Day.
So I'm Instagram. That's at BBJazz III. BB Jazzy, as Isaac likes to mock me. So that's me on Instagram. My website's BennyBenackJazz.com. And, for better or for worse, I make it very easy to find me and where I'm up to. I'm not close to the vest at all. So you just, shout out my name into the ether and, everything will come up. So
excellent. This was great, Benny.
Thank you very much, man. Thanks for coming up to Harlem.
Sure. All the best to you. I wish you continued success.
All right. When first we met, my heart was still, but once we kissed, I felt a thrill I'd never known while stuck alone until then later on we grew apart, again betrayed by my poor heart, to watch love's embers die and not know why is cruel. Thought this time I knew real love, the kind to last forevermore. Yet now I wonder if I'll feel love or watch my heart just close the door. Yes, later on I'll win my prize, but now I curse this heart that lies, a heart that burns so bright yet turns at night, will always search for a love that never dies, a love that time I knew real love, the kind to last forevermore. Yet now I wonder if I'll feel love or watch my heart just close the door. Yes, later on I'll win my pride, but now I curse this heart that lies, a heart that burns so bright, yet turns at night, will always search for a love that never dies, a love that's true.
Benny Benack III with Later On from his forthcoming album, A Lot of Living to Do. Make sure you visit him online at bennybenackjazz.com, and you would be a fool not to check him out on Instagram at bbjazzii. Before we go, some light housekeeping. I have a website, talkmusictalk.com, where you can stream every single episode. I'm also on social media, so you can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook at This Is Boice. And I have a special request for you. Subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Play, and many other places. Just search for Talk Music Talk with Boice. And while you are there, please leave a 5-star rating and or review to help grow the Talk Music Talk audience. There is also a Talk Music Talk app. It is free wherever you like to get your apps. Again, just search for Talk Music Talk with Boice. And don't forget to check out my other podcast, the Strandcast, the official podcast of Strand Bookstore, 12th and Broadway in New York City. Link in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, and there will be a next time, this one's for you, Liz.